The Texas Supreme Court blocks a Dallas mom from getting an emergency abortion, but the court's order is raising more questions.
When is the medical exception really going to allow life-saving medical care?
How the decision could affect other challenges to the state's abortion ban.
We have to, as leaders in the Democratic Party, encourage our Democratic leadership to work towards stopping this war.
The question of a ceasefire in Gaza divides the top Texas Democrats running for Senate. We hear from the candidates about an issue that's causing friction for the party. Thousands of Texans looking for help after the state wrongfully kicked them off Medicaid.
People are making really hard choices right now about what do they spend on Christmas gifts? Do they fix their car? How are they going to pay rent?
Why there's now some encouraging news about efforts to restore those lost benefits.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Monica Madden in for Josh Hinkle. The ballot is set for the 2024 Texas primary. Monday marked the deadline for candidates to file. One of the most watched races will determine which Democrat will face U.S. Senator Ted Cruz next November. 10 candidates are on the ballot, but 2 stand out: Congressman Colin Allred and State Senator Roland Gutierrez. Both men share similar positions on key issues, but there is one difference in their views on the war between Israel and Hamas. Both do support Israel, but Ryan Chandler found they have different beliefs on how Israel should fight and how the U.S. should support them.
Dallas Congressman Colin Allred stopping short of calling for a ceasefire.
This is a war of choice by Hamas. They chose this war. They are still holding over 200 hostages right now. They could release those hostages. They could lay down their arms.
You are not calling for a ceasefire at this time?
No, I'm not.
I think he's out of touch with reality here.
San Antonio State Senator Roland Gutierrez says Allred is out of step with Texas Democrats. He's calling for a ceasefire and says he would put greater conditions on military aid for Israel.
Colin Allred needs to take back his position on this issue because we need to stop the killing of women and children. That's not who we are as a nation.
Since Hamas terrorists killed 1,200 Israeli civilians on October 7th, Israeli counterattacks have killed nearly 20,000 Palestinians, 2/3 of them women and children. That led the Texas Democratic Party to unanimously call for a ceasefire.
I understand the complexities of the issue prevent someone from, at this time, Congressman Allred from supporting it. But from our perspective, we think that we have to, as leaders in the Democratic Party, encourage our Democratic leadership to work towards stopping this war.
Senator Ted Cruz argues a ceasefire would help Hamas. He's calling for unequivocal support for Israel's defense systems.
In the last several days, over 4,000 rockets have rained down on the people of Israel from Hamas. Their objective is to kill women, to kill children, to kill innocent civilians.
Both of his top contenders supporting Israel and calling for greater protection for civilians.
Israel has every right to defend itself, but they have to do that within the context of the laws of war.
I'm not choosing between Israel or Palestine. I'm choosing peace.
Ryan Chandler, State of Texas.
We now want to take a deeper dive, not only in the Senate race, but other big state primary races. Joining us now is Jeremy Wallace, politics reporter for the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News, and co-host of the Texas Take podcast. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us. We also have our own Capitol correspondent, Ryan Chandler. Thanks, you guys.
Jeremy's resume is a little longer than mine.
Jeremy, I want to start with you first and foremost. Governor Abbott has been delivering on his promise to endorse some of the primary challengers to the Republican incumbents who voted against school vouchers and school choice at the end of the 4th special session. Do you think that his endorsement is going to carry a lot of weight in these races?
Generally, no, right? Because typically an endorsement from the governor alone isn't going to be enough to really sway voters, and he has done this in the past. But what might make this different than previous years is that he's clearly much more fired up about this. And if they do start putting money into these races and really starting to flex some muscle, they sound like they're really going to put a lot more pressure on these incumbents than I think we're used to seeing from the governor's office. I'm not sure if his message is enough to dislodge them, but certainly they think that the polling is with them and they're going to go full bore and try to knock these incumbents out.
Absolutely. And, you know, the House, of course, has become a battleground for Republicans, and there are some major splits that we're seeing between top leaders in terms of endorsements. Ryan, how have you been seeing that shape out so far as we head into primary season?
Yeah, you're right. There's at least 22 House races in which Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton have endorsed different candidates. They're waging their own kind of revenge tours in these primaries, but they have very different motivations. For Governor Abbott, it's all about education savings accounts, and he's endorsing against any Republican who voted against his top priority there. For Paxton, it's a lot more personal. He's endorsing against anybody who voted to impeach him. So whether it's ESAs or impeachment, Abbott and Paxton both have these vendettas against a lot of House members, but sometimes that puts them at odds in these individual races.
And look how unusual this is. You know, we're used to the Republican Party having some infighting going on, but it's usually behind the scenes a little bit. But this cycle, we're seeing these feuds within the Republican Party like wide open. Like, you know, it's very public. There's so much acrimony. We're just not used to seeing it so openly and so raw in this kind of format where you literally have Republican on Republican going into the primary season, and they want everybody to know it.
Yeah, and Jeremy, I could ask you the same question. Do you think Ken Paxton's endorsement will have some weight when you think about the typical Republican primary voter?
Yeah, the typical Republican primary voter is a small number, right? We know from history that Republicans just, you know, nobody votes in our primary, really, you know, in comparison to how many voters we have. We have one of the lowest primary participation rates in the nation. It's because it's so early in the year. And so that tells me the voters who are going there are the most hardcore Republican voters that you have out there. And that is the one area where Ken Paxton might have a little influence. Like, he can get to the Republican Party events, you know, where the Republican executive committees have meetings regularly. They're the ones who are for sure going to be voting. And thus their vote becomes a lot more than your average, you know, garden variety Republican who, you know, maybe comes in every now and then. Those people aren't going to be nearly as prevalent. So that's a long way to say, yeah, Ken Paxton will have an influence on this base of Republicans who might just be at a poll enough. They might be angry enough about it to really have some impact.
And we can't forget about the Democrats. Ryan, I know you did some reporting on some of the surprises that we saw after filing deadline.
Big primary news in the Democratic Party. Victoria Neave Criado is challenging the very liberal Democratic senator from Dallas, Nathan Johnson. Neave Criado is a very respected and effective member of the House, the chair of the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus, and she says that the incumbent Senator Johnson is not doing enough to stand up to the Senate GOP. She specifically criticizes him for a vote he took on a human smuggling bill that increased the penalties for human trafficking. And she says that amounts to a racial profiling bill, and she's going to stand up for the Mexican-American community up in Johnson's district. We'll see how that race goes. Johnson, at least at this point, is the odds-on favorite, and just in terms of the money.
Well, and remember that primary, particularly for the Democrats, you know, Joe Biden clearly is not going to have much of a challenge. There are two challengers out there. That means even fewer Democrats coming out to vote. There aren't going to be many people who ultimately get to decide that race. There's just not enough active Democratic primaries in Dallas-Fort Worth to kind of make that a big turnout type of election. So this is a race that really could come down to just a handful of Democrats, and that is like anybody's game.
Absolutely. All right, Ryan Chandler, Jeremy Walls, thanks so much for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
How much did Ken Paxton's impeachment trial cost Texas taxpayers? We got the receipts, how it compares to the proposed settlement, and why the state may need to pay even more. A Texas Supreme Court decision pushes a Dallas mom to flee the state to get an emergency abortion. Why that order could have an impact on other women challenging the law.